Get ready to dim the lights and lock your doors. Friday Night Frights is here to haunt your weekend. Every Friday night, we bring you spine-chilling tales of the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. From cursed artifacts to shadowy creatures lurking in the dark, these stories will keep you on the edge of your seat long after the episode ends. Are you brave enough to listen? Tune in and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more eerie episodes. Tonight's story is called The Red House by Robert R. McCammon. So grab a cup of something yummy, sit back and relax, and enjoy the story. I've got a story to tell, like everybody else in the world, because that's what makes up life, isn't it? Sure, everybody's got a story about somebody they've met, or something that's happened to them, or something they've done, something they want to do, something they'll never do. In the life of everybody on this old spinning ball, there's a story about a road not taken, or a love that went bad, or a ghost of some kind. You know what I mean. You've got one too. Well, I want to tell you a story. Trouble is, there are so many things I remember about Greystone Bay. I could tell you about what Joey Hammers and I found in the wreck of an old Chevy down where the blind man lives, amid the junked cars. I could tell you about the time the snakes started coming out of old Lady Pharaoh's faucets. I could tell you about that Elvis Presley impersonator who came to town and went crazy when he couldn't get his makeup off. Oh, yeah, I know a lot about what goes on in the Bay. Some things I wouldn't want to tell you after the sun goes down, but I want to tell you a story about me. You decide if it's worth the telling. My name's Bob Deacon. Once upon a time, I was Bobby Deacon, and I lived with my mom and dad in one of the clapboard houses on Accardo Street, up near South Hill. There are a lot of clapboard houses up there, all the same shape and size and color, kind of a slate gray, a tombstone color. All of them have identical windows, front porches, and concrete steps leading up from the street. I swear to God, I think all of them have the same cracks in those steps, too. I mean, it's like they built one of those houses and took a black and white picture of it and said, "This is the ideal house for Accardo Street." And they put everyone together just the same, right down to the warped doors that stick in the summer and hang when it's cold. I guess Mr. Lindquist figured those houses were good enough for the Greeks and Portuguese, Italians and Poles who live in them and work at his factory. Of course, a lot of plain old Americans live on Accardo Street, too, and they work for Mr. Lindquist like my dad does. Everybody up on Accardo pays rent to Mr. Lindquist, see? He owns all those houses. He's one of the richest men in Greystone Bay, and his factory churns out cogs, gears, and wheels for heavy machinery. I worked as a quality controller there during the summer break from high school. Dad got me the job, and I stood at a conveyor belt with a few other teenage guys, and all we did day after day was make sure a certain size of gear fit into a perfect mold. If it was one hair off, we flipped it into a box, and all the rejects were sent back to be melted down and stamped all over again. Sounds simple, I guess, but the conveyor belt pushed thousands of gears past us every hour, and our supervisor, Mr. Gallagher, was a real bastard with an eagle eye for bad gears that slipped past. Whenever I had a complaint about the factory, Dad said I ought to be thankful I could get a job there at all, times being so bad and all, and Mom just shrugged her shoulders and said that Mr. Lindquist probably started out counting and checking gears somewhere too. But you ask my dad what kind of machines all those gears, cogs, and wheels went into, and he couldn't tell you. He'd worked there since he was 19 years old, but he still didn't know. He wasn't interested in what they did or where they went when the crates left the loading docks. All he did was make them, and that's the only thing that mattered to him. Millions and millions of gears, bound for unknown machines in faraway cities, a long way off from Greystone Bay. South Hill's okay. I mean, it's not the greatest place, but it's not a slum either. I guess the worst thing about living on Accardo Street is that there are so many houses, and all of them the same. A lot of people are born in the houses on Accardo Street, maybe move 2 or 3 doors away when they get married, and they have kids who go to work at Mr. Lindquist's factory, and then their kids move 2 or 3 doors away, and it just goes on and on. Even Mr. Lindquist used to be Mr. Lindquist Jr., and he lives in the same big white house that his grandfather built. But sometimes when my dad started drinking and yelling and Mom locked herself in the bathroom to get away from him, I used to go up to the end of the street. The hulk of what used to be a Catholic church stands up there. It caught on fire in the late 70s, right in the middle of one of the worst snowstorms the Bay ever saw. It was a hell of a mess, but the church wasn't completely destroyed. The firemen never found Father Marion's body. I don't know the whole story, but I've heard things I shouldn't repeat. Anyway, I found a way to climb up to what was left of the old bell tower, and the thing creaked and moaned like it was about to topple off, but the risk was worth it. Up there you could see the whole of Greystone Bay, the way the land curved to touch the sea, and you got a sense of where you were in the world. And out there on the ocean you could see yachts, workboats, and ships of all kinds passing by, heading for different harbors. At night their lights were especially pretty, and sometimes you could hear a distant whistle blow, like a voice that whispered, "Follow me." And sometimes I wanted to. Oh, yeah, I did. But Dad said the world beyond Greystone Bay wasn't worth a shit, and a bull should roam his own pasture. That was his favorite saying, and why everybody called him Bull. Mom said I was too young to know my own mind. She was always on my case to go out with that nice Donna Raffaelli, because the Raffaellis lived at the end of the block, and Mr. Raffaelli was Dad's immediate supervisor in the factory. Nobody listens to a kid until he screams, and by then it's too late. Don't let anybody tell you the summers aren't hot in Greystone Bay. Come mid-July, the streets start to sizzle, and the air is a stagnant haze. I swear I've seen seagulls have heat strokes and fall right out of the sky. Well, it was on one of those hot, steamy July mornings, a Saturday, because Dad and I didn't have to work, when the painters pulled up in a white truck. The house right across the street from ours had been vacant for about 3 weeks. Old Mr. Papados had a heart attack in the middle of the night, and at his funeral Mr. Lindquist gave a little speech because the old man had worked at the factory for almost 40 years. Mrs. Papados went west to live with a relative. I wished her luck on the day she left, but Mom just closed the curtains and Dad turned the TV up louder. But on this particular morning in July, all of us were on the front porch trying to catch a breeze. We were sweltering and sweating, and Dad was telling me how this was the year the Yankees were going to the World Series. And then the painters pulled up. They started setting up their ladders and getting ready to work. "Going to have a new neighbor," Mom said, fanning herself with a handkerchief. She turned her chair as if to accept a breeze, but actually it was to watch the house across the street. "I wonder what job Mr. Lindquist has given our new neighbor." Mom's glance flickered toward Dad, and then away as fast as a fly can escape a swatter. "The line," Mr. Lindquist always starts out new people on the line. I just hope to God whoever it is knows something about baseball, because your son sure don't." "Come on, Dad," I said weakly. It seems like my voice was always weak around him. I had graduated from high school in May, was working full-time at the factory, but Dad had a way of making me feel 12 years old and stupid as a stone. "Well, you don't," he shot back, "thinking the Cubs are going to take the series? Crap! The Cubs ain't never going to get to the—" "I wonder if they have a daughter," Mom said. "Hey, don't you talk when I'm talking. What do you think I am, a wall?" The painters were prying their paint cans open. One of them dipped his brush in. "Oh, my God," Mom whispered, her eyes widening. "Would you look at that?" We did, and we were stunned, speechless. The paint was not the bland gray of all the other clapboard houses on Accardo Street. Oh, no. That paint was as scarlet as a robin's breast. Redder than that, as red as the neon signs down where the bars stand on Harbor Road. Crimson as the warning lights out on the bay when the breakers crash and boom on jagged rocks. Red as the party dress of a girl I saw at a dance but didn't have enough nerve to meet. Red as a cape swirled before the eyes of a bull. As the painters began to cover the door of that house with screaming scarlet, Dad came out of his chair with a grunt as if he'd been kicked in the rear. If there was anything he hated in the world, it was the color red. It was a communist color, he'd always said. Red China, Red Square, the Red Army. He thought the Cincinnati Reds was the lousiest team in baseball, and even the sight of a red shirt drove him to ranting fits. I don't know what it was, maybe something in his mind or his chemistry maybe. He just went into a screaming rage when he saw the color red. "Hey!" he yelled across the street. The painters stopped working and looked up because this shout had been loud enough to rattle the windows in their frames. "What do you think you're doing over there?" "Ice skating," came the reply. "What does it look like we're doing?" "Get it off!" Dad roared, his eyes about to explode from his head. "Get that shit off right now!" He started down the concrete steps with Mom yelling at him not to lose his temper, and I knew somebody was going to get hurt if he got his hands on those painters. But he stopped at the edge of the street, and by this time people were coming out of their houses all around to see what the noise was all about. It was no big deal, though. There was always some kind of yelling and commotion on the street, especially when the weather turned hot and the walls of those clapboard houses closed in like cages. Dad hollered, "Mr. Lindquist owns these houses. You idiots! Look around. You see any of the others painted commie red?" "Nope," one of them replied, while the other kept on painting. "Then what the hell are you doing?" "We're following Mr. Lindquist's direct orders," the painter said. "He told us to come up here to 311 Accardo Street and paint the whole place firehouse red." He tapped one of the cans with his foot. "This is firehouse red, and that's 311 Accardo." He pointed to the little metal numbers up above the front door. "Any more questions, Einstein?" "These houses are gray," Dad shouted, his face blotching with color. "They've been gray for 100 years. You gonna paint every house on this street commie red?" "Nope, firehouse red, and we're just painting this place right here, inside and outside, but that's the only house we're supposed to touch." "It's right in front of my door. I'll have to look at it," My God, a color like that screams to be looked at. I can't stand that color. Tough. Take it up with Mr. Lindquist. And then he joined the other painter in the work, and when Dad returned to the house, he started throwing around furniture and cursing like a madman. Mom locked herself in the bathroom with a magazine, and I went up to the church to watch the boats go by. As it turned out, on Monday, Dad gathered his courage to go see Mr. Lindquist on his lunch break. He got only as far as Mr. Lindquist's secretary, who said she'd been the one to call Greystone painters and convey the orders. That was all she knew about it. On the drive home, Dad was so mad he almost wrecked the car. And there was the red house, right across the street from our own gray, dismal-looking clapboard house, the paint still so fresh that it smelled up the whole block. "He's trying to get to me," Dad said in a nervous voice at dinner. "Yeah, sure. Mr. Lindquist wants to get rid of me, but he don't have the guts of his father. He's afraid of me, so he paints a house commie red and sticks it in my face. Sure, that's what it's got to be." He called Mr. Raffaelli up the street to find out what was going on, but learned only that a new man had been hired and would be reporting to work in a week. I tell you, that was a crazy week. Like I say, I don't know why the color red bothered my dad so much. Maybe there's a story in that, too. But all I know is that he started climbing the walls. It took everything he had to open the front door in the morning and go to work, because the morning sunlight would lie on the walls of that red house and make it look like a 4-alarm fire. And in the evening, the setting sun set it aflame from another direction. People started driving along Accardo Street, tourists yet, just to take a look at the gaudy thing. Dad double-locked the doors and pulled the shades as if he thought the red house might rip itself off its foundations at night and come rattling across the street after him. Dad said he couldn't breathe when he looked at that house. The awful red color stole the breath right out of his lungs, and he started going to bed early at night with the radio tuned to a baseball game and blaring right beside his head. But in the dark, when there was no more noise from the room where Mom and Dad slept in their separate beds, I sometimes unlocked the front door and went out on the porch to stand in the steamy night. I wouldn't dare tell them, but I liked the red house. I mean, it looked like an island of life in a gray sea. For 100 years there had been only gray houses here, all of them exactly the same, not a nail or a joint different. And now this. I didn't know why, but I was about to find out in a big way. Our new neighbors came to the red house exactly 1 week after the house had been painted. They made enough noise to wake the rich folks in their mansions up on North Hill, hollering and laughing on an ordinarily silent Saturday morning. And when I went out on the porch to see, my folks were already out there. Dad's face was almost purple, and there was a mixture of rage and terror in his eyes. Mom was stunned, and she kept rubbing his arm and holding him to keep him from flinging himself down the steps. The man had crew-cut hair the color of fire. He wore a red checked shirt and trousers the shade of Italian wine. On his feet were red cowboy boots, and he was unloading a U-Haul trailer hooked to the back of a beat-up old red station wagon. The woman wore a pink blouse and crimson jeans, and her shoulder-length hair glinted strawberry blonde in the strong morning light. A little boy and a little girl, about 6 and 7, were scampering around underfoot, and both of them had hair that was almost the same color of the house that they'd come to inhabit. Well, suddenly the man in red looked up, saw us on the porch, and waved. "Howdy," he called in a twanging voice that sounded like a cat being kicked. He put aside the crimson box he'd been carrying, strode across the street in his red cowboy boots, and right up the steps onto our porch, and stood there grinning. His complexion looked as if he'd been weaned on ketchup. "Hello," Mom said breathlessly, her hand digging into Dad's arm. He was about to snort steam. "Name's Virgil Sykes," the man announced. He had thick red eyebrows, an open, friendly face, and light brown eyes that were almost orange. He held a hand out toward Dad. "Pleased to meet you, I'm sure." Dad was trembling. He looked at Virgil Sykes' hand like it was a cow flop in a bull's pasture. I don't know why. I guess I was nervous. I didn't think. I just reached out and shook the man's hand. It was hot, like he was running a high fever. "Hi," I said. "I'm Bobby Deacon." "Howdy, Bobby." He looked over his shoulder at the woman and 2 kids. "Evie, bring Rory and Garnet up here and meet the Deaconses." His accent sounded foreign, slurred and drawled, and then I realized it was deep south. He grinned wide and proud as the woman and 2 children came up the steps. "This is my wife and kids," Virgil said. "We're from Alabama, long ways from here. I reckon we're going to be neighbors." All that red had just about paralyzed my dad. He made a croaking sound, and then he got the words out. "Get off my porch." "Pardon?" Virgil asked, still smiling. "Get off," Dad repeated. His voice was rising. "Get off my porch, you damned redneck hick." Virgil kept his smile, but his eyes narrowed just a fraction. I could see the hurt in them. He looked at me again. "Good to meet you, Bobby," he said in a quieter voice. "Come on over and visit sometime, here?" "He will not," Dad told him. "Y'all have a good day," Virgil said, and he put his arm around Evie. They walked down the steps together, the kids right at their heels. Dad pulled free from my mother. "Nobody around here lives in a red house," he shouted at their backs. They didn't stop. "Nobody with any sense wants to. Who do you think you are, coming around here dressed like that? You a commie or something? You hick? Why don't you go back where you belong, you damned—" And then he stopped suddenly, because I think he could feel me staring at him. He turned his head, and we stared at each other in silence. Well, I love my dad. When I was a kid, I used to think he hung the moon. I remember him letting me ride on his shoulders. He was a good man back then, and he tried to be a good father. But at that moment, on that hot July Saturday morning, I saw that there were things in him that he couldn't help, things that had been stamped in the gears of his soul by the hands of ancestors he never even knew. Everybody has those things in them, little quirks, meannesses, and petty things that don't get much light. That's part of being human. But when you love somebody and you catch a glimpse of those things you've never seen before, it kind of makes your heart pound a little harder. I also saw, as if for the first time, that my dad had exactly the same shade of blue eyes as my own. "What are you looking at?" Dad asked, his face all screwed up and painful. He looked so old. There was gray in his hair and deep lines on his face. So old and tired and very much afraid. I dropped my gaze like a dog about to be kicked because Dad always made me feel weak. I shook my head and got back inside the house quick. I heard Mom and Dad talking out there. His voice was loud, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. Then, gradually, his voice settled down. I lay on my bed and stared at a crack in the ceiling that I'd seen 1,000,000 times, and I wondered why I'd never tried to patch it up in all those years. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was right on the edge of being a man. No, I hadn't patched that crack because I was waiting for somebody else to do it, and it was never going to get done that way. He knocked on the door after a while, but he didn't wait for me to invite him in. That wasn't his way. He stood in the doorway, and finally he shrugged his big, heavy shoulders and said, "Sorry, I blew my top, huh? Well, do you blame me? It's that damned red house, Bobby. It's making me crazy. I can't even think about nothing else. You understand that, don't you?" "It's just a red house," I said. "That's all it is. Just a house with red paint." "It's different," he replied sharply, and I flinched. "Accardo Street has been just fine for 100 years the way it used to be. Why the hell does it have to change?" "I don't know," I said. "Damned right you don't know, 'cause you don't know about life. You get ahead in this world by putting your nose to the wheel and saying yes, sir, and no, sir, and towing the line." "Whose line?" I asked. "The line of anybody who pays you money. Now, don't you get smart with me, either. You're not man enough yet that I can't tear you up if I want to." I looked at him, and something in my face made him wince. "I love you, Dad," I said. "I'm not your enemy." He put a hand to his forehead for a moment, then leaned against the doorframe. "You don't see it, do you?" he asked quietly. "One red house is all it takes. Then everything starts to change. They paint the houses, and the rent goes up. Then somebody thinks Accardo Street would be a nice place to put condos that overlook the bay. They bring machines in to do the work of the man at the factory, and don't you think they don't have machines like that? One red house, and everything starts to change. God knows I don't understand why Mr. Lindquist painted it. He's not like his old man was, not by a long shot." "Maybe things need to change," I said. "Maybe they should change." "Yeah, right. And where would I be? Where else am I going to find work at my age? Want me to start collecting garbage the tourists leave down at the beach? And where would you be? The factory's your future, too, you know." I took a step then, over the line into forbidden territory. "I'd still like to go to college, Dad. My grades are good enough. The school counselor said—" "I've told you we'll talk about that later," Dad said firmly. "Right now we need the extra money. Times are tough, Bobby. You've got to pull your weight and toe the line. Remember, a bull should roam his own pasture, right?" I guess I agreed with him. I don't really remember. Anyway, he left my room, and I lay there for a long time, just thinking. I think I remember hearing a boat's whistle blow way off in the distance, and then I fell asleep. On Monday morning, we found out where Virgil Sykes was assigned. Not the line, not the loading dock. He came right into the big room where my dad worked on one of the machines that smoothed and polished the gears until they were all exactly the same, and he started working on a machine about 20 feet away. I didn't see him because I worked on the loading dock that summer, but my dad was a nervous wreck at the end of the day. Seems Virgil Sykes was wearing all red again, and as we were to learn, that's the only color he would wear, crimson right down to his socks. It began to drive Dad crazy. But I know one thing. The first week Virgil Sykes worked at the factory, I carted about 20 more crates than usual off that loading dock. The second week, the factory's quota was up by at least 30 crates. I know because my sore muscles took count. The story finally came from Mr. Raffaelli. Virgil Sykes had hands as fast as fire, and he worked like no man Mr. Raffaelli had ever seen before. Rumor was circulating around the factory that Sykes had labored in a lot of different factories along the coast, and in every one of them he'd boosted production by from 20 to 30%. The man was never still, never slowed down, and never even took a water break. And somehow Mr. Lindquist had found out about him and hired him away from a factory down south. But to come to Greystone Bay, Virgil Sykes had asked one thing, that the house he lived in be painted as bright a red, inside and out, as the painters could find. "That redneck's a lot younger than me," Dad said at dinner. "I could do that much work when I was his age." But all of us knew that wasn't true. All of us knew nobody at the factory could work like that. "He keeps on us like this, he's going to blow up his damn machine. Then we'll see what Lindquist thinks about him." But about a week after that, word came down to assign Virgil Sykes to 2 polishers at the same time. He handled them both with ease, his own speed gearing up to match the machines. The red house began to haunt Dad's dreams. Some nights he woke up in a cold sweat, yelling and thrashing around. When he got drunk, he ranted about painting our house bright blue or yellow, but all of us knew Mr. Lindquist wouldn't let him do that. No, Virgil Sykes was special. He was different, and that's why Mr. Lindquist let him live in a red house amid the gray ones. And one night when Dad was drunk, he said something that I knew had been on his mind for a long time. "Bobby boy," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder and squeezing, "what if something bad was to happen to that damn commie red house over there? What if somebody was to light a little bitty fire, and that red house was to go up like a—" "Are you crazy?" Mom interrupted. "You don't know what you're saying." "Shut up," he bellowed. "We're talking man to man." And that started another yelling match. I got out of the house pretty quick and went up the church to be alone. I didn't go back home until 1 or 2 in the morning. It was quiet on Accardo, and all the houses were dark. But I saw a flicker of light on the red house's porch. A match. Somebody was sitting on the porch, lighting a cigarette. "Howdy, Bobby," Virgil Sykes' voice said quietly in its thick southern drawl. I stopped, wondering how he could see it was me. "Hi," I said, and then I started to go up the steps to my own house, because I wasn't supposed to be talking to him, and he was kind of spooky anyway. "Hold on," he said. I stopped again. "Why don't you come on over and sit a spell?" "I can't. It's way too late." He laughed softly. "Oh, it's never too late. Come on up. Let's have a talk." I hesitated, thought of my room with a cracked ceiling. In that gray house, Dad would be snoring, and Mom might be muttering in her sleep. I turned around, walked across the street, and up to the red house's porch. "Have a seat, Bobby," Virgil offered, and I sat down in a chair next to him. I couldn't see very much in the dark, but I knew the chair was painted red. The tip of his cigarette glowed bright orange, and Virgil's eyes seemed to shine like circles of flame. We talked for a while about the factory. He asked me how I liked it, and I said it was okay. Oh, he asked me all sorts of questions about myself, what I liked, what I didn't like, how I felt about Greystone Bay. Before long, I guess I was telling him everything about myself, things I suppose I'd never even told my folks. I don't know why, but while I was talking to him, I felt as comfortable as if I were sitting in front of a warm, reassuring fireplace on a cold, uncertain night. "Look at those stars," Virgil said suddenly. "Did you ever see the like?" Well, I hadn't noticed them before, but now I looked. The sky was full of glittering dots, thousands and thousands of them, strewn over Greystone Bay like diamonds on black velvet. "Know what most of those are?" he asked me. "Worlds of fire. Oh, yeah. They're created out of fire, and they burn so bright before they go out, so very bright. You know, fire creates and it destroys, too, and sometimes it can do both at the same time." He looked at me, his orange eyes catching the light from his cigarette. "Your father doesn't think too highly of me, does he?" "No, I guess not. But part of it's the house. He can't stand the color red." "And I can't stand to live without it," he answered. "It's the color of fire. I like that color. It's the color of newness and energy and change. To me, it's the color of life itself." "So that's why you wanted the house changed from gray to red?" "That's right. I couldn't live in a gray house. Neither could Evie or the kids. See, I figure houses are a lot like the people who live in them. You look around here at all these gray houses, and you know the people who live there have got gray souls. Maybe it's not their choice. Maybe it is. But what I'm saying is that everybody can choose if he has the courage." "Well, Mr. Lindquist wouldn't let anybody else paint their house a different color. You're different because you work so good." "Well, I work so good because I live in a red house," Virgil said. "I won't go to any town where I can't live in one. I spell that out good and proper before I take a man's money. See, I've made my choice. Oh, maybe I won't ever be a millionaire, and I won't live in a mansion, but in my way, in my own way, I'm rich. What more does a man need than to be able to make his own choices?" "Easy for you to say." "Bobby," Virgil said quietly, "everybody can choose what color to paint their own house. It don't matter who you are, or how rich or how poor. You're the one who lives inside the walls. Some folks long to be red houses amid the gray, but they let somebody else do the painting." He stared at me in the dark. His cigarette had gone out, and he lit another with a thin red flame. "Greystone Bay's got a lot of gray houses in it," he said. "Lots of old ones, and ones yet to be." He was talking in riddles. Like I say, he was kind of spooky. We sat for a while in silence, and then I stood up and said I'd better be getting to bed because work came early the next morning. He said good night, and I started across the street. It wasn't until I was in my room that I realized I hadn't seen any matches or a lighter when Virgil had lit that second cigarette. "Lots of old ones," Virgil had said, "and ones yet to be." I went to sleep with that on my mind. And it seemed like I'd just closed my eyes when I heard my dad say, "Up and at 'em, Bobby. Factory whistle's about to blow." The next week the loading dock moved at least 35 more crates over quota. We could hardly keep up with them as they came out of the packing room. Dad couldn't believe how fast Virgil Sykes worked. He said that man moved so fast between those two machines that the air got hot, and Virgil's red clothes seemed to smoke. One evening we came home and Mom was all shook up. It seemed she had got a telephone call from Mrs. Avery from 2 houses up. Mrs. Avery had gone nosing around the red house and had looked into the kitchen window to see Evie Sykes standing over the range. Evie Sykes had turned all the burners on and was holding her face above them like an ordinary person would accept a breeze from a fan. And Mrs. Avery swore she'd seen the other woman bend down and press her forehead to one of the burners, as if it were a block of ice. "My God," Dad whispered, "they're not human. I knew something was wrong with them the first time I saw them. Somebody ought to run them out. Somebody ought to burn that damned red house to the ground." And this time, Mom didn't say anything. God forgive me, I didn't say anything either. Lots of old ones, and ones yet to be. Rumor got around the factory. Virgil Sykes was going to be in charge of 3 polishing machines, and somebody in that department was going to get a pink slip. Well, you know how rumors are. Sometimes they hold a kernel of truth. Most times they're just nervous air. Whatever the case, Dad started making a detour to the liquor store on the way home from work 3 nights a week. He broke out in a sweat when we turned onto Accardo and had to approach the red house. He could hardly sleep at night, and sometimes he sat in the front room with his head in his hands, and if either Mom or I spoke a word, he blew up like a firecracker. And finally, on a hot August night, his face covered with sweat, he said quietly, "I can't breathe any more. It's that red house. It's stealing life right out of me. God Almighty, I can't take it any more." He rose from his chair, looked at me, and said, "Come on, Bobby." "Where are we going?" I asked him as we walked down the steps to the car. Across the street, the lights of the red house were blazing. "You don't ask questions. You just do as I say. Get in now. We've got places to go." I did as he said, and as we pulled away from the curb, I looked over at the red house and thought I saw a figure standing at the window, peering out. Dad drove out into the sticks and found a hardware store still open. He bought 2 3-gallon gasoline cans. He already had a third in the back. Then he drove to a gas station where nobody knew us, and he filled up all 3 cans at the pumps. On the way home, the smell of gasoline almost made me sick. "It has to be done, Bobby," Dad said, his eyes glittering and his face splotched with color. "You and me have to do it. Us men have to stick together, right? It's for the good of both of us, Bobby. Those Sykes people aren't human." "They're just different, Dad," I said. My heart was hammering, and I couldn't think straight. "Yeah, they're different. They don't belong here. We don't need any red houses on our street. Things have been fine for 100 years, and we're going to make them fine again, aren't we?" You're going to kill them," I whispered. "No, hell no. I wouldn't kill anybody. I'm going to set the fire and then start yelling. They'll wake up and run out the back door. Nobody'll get hurt. They'll know it was you." "Oh, you'll say we were watching a movie on TV. So will your mom. We'll figure out what to say. Damn it, Bobby, are you with me or against me?" I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. What's wrong and what's right when you love somebody? Dad waited until all the lights had gone out on Accardo Street. Mom sat with us in the front room. She didn't say anything, and she wouldn't look at either of us. We waited until the Johnny Carson show was over. Then Dad put his lighter into his pocket, picked up 2 of the gas cans, and told me to get the third. He had to tell me twice, but I did it. With all the lights off but the glow of the TV, I followed my father out of the room and across the street, and quickly up to the red house's porch. Everything was silent and dark. My palms were sweating, and I almost dropped my gas can going up the steps. Dad started pouring gas over the red-painted boards, just sloshing it everywhere. He poured all the gas out from 2 cans, and then he looked at me standing there. "Pour yours out," he whispered. "Go on, Bobby." "Pour yours out," he whispered. "Go on, Bobby." "Dad," I said weakly, "please don't do this." He jerked the can from my hand and sloshed it over the porch, too. "Dad, please, they don't mean any harm. Just because they're different, just because they live in a house that's a different color." "They shouldn't be different," Dad told me. His voice was strained, and I knew he was right at the end of his rope. "We don't like different people here. We don't need different people." He started fumbling for his lighter, took from his pocket a rag he'd brought from the kitchen. "Please don't, Dad. They haven't hurt us. Let's just forget it, okay? We can just walk away." His lighter flared. He started to touch the flame to the rag. Lots of old ones, I thought, and ones yet to be. Me. Virgil Sykes had been talking about me. I thought about gears at that instant. Millions and millions of gears going down a conveyor belt, and all of them exactly the same. I thought about the concrete walls of the factory. I thought about the machines and the constant pounding, damning rhythm. I thought about a cage of a gray clapboard, and I looked at my dad's scared face in the orange light and realized he was terrified of what lay outside the gray clapboards. Opportunity, choices, chance, life. He was scared to death, and I knew right then that I could not be my father's son. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before, and I heard my voice, stronger now, the voice of a stranger, say, "No!" Before Dad could react, the red-painted front door opened, and there was Virgil Sykes, his orange eyes glittering. He was smoking a cigarette. Behind him stood his wife and 2 kids, 3 more pairs of orange glowing eyes like campfires in the night. "Howdy," Virgil said in his soft southern drawl. "Y'all having fun?" My dad started sputtering. I still had hold of his wrist. Virgil smiled in the dark. "One less gray house in Greystone Bay, Bobby." And then he dropped the cigarette onto the gas-soaked boards at his feet. The flames caught, burst up high. I tried to grab Virgil, but he pulled back. Then Dad was pulling me off the porch as the boards began to explode into flame. We ran down into the street, and both of us were yelling for the Sykeses to get out the back door before the whole house caught. But they didn't. Oh, no. Virgil took one of the children in his arms and sat down in a red chair, and his wife took the other and sat down beside him in the midst of the flames. The porch caught, hot and bright, and as we watched in fascinated horror, we saw all 4 of the Sykeses burst into flame. But their fire figures were just sitting there in the chairs, as if they were enjoying a nice day at the beach. I saw Virgil's head nod. I saw Evie smile before fire filled up her face. The children became forms of flame, happy fires, bouncing and kicking joyfully in the laps of the parents. I thought something then, something I shouldn't think about too much. I thought, they were always made of fire, and now they're going back to what they were. Cinders spun into the air, flew up and glittered like stars, worlds on fire. The 4 figures began to disintegrate. There were no screams, no cries of pain, but I thought I heard Virgil Sykes laugh like the happiest man in the world. or something that had appeared to be a man. Lights were coming on all up and down the block. The flames were shooting up high, and the red house was almost engulfed. I watched the sparks of what had been the Sykes family fly up high, so very high, and then they drifted off together over Greystone Bay, and whether they winked out or just kept going, I don't know. I heard the siren of a fire truck coming. I looked at my dad, looked long and hard, because I wanted to remember his face. He looked so small, so small. And then I turned and started walking along Accardo Street, away from the burning house. Dad grabbed at my arm, but I pulled free as easily as if I were being held by a shadow. I kept walking right to the end of Accardo, and then I just kept walking. I love my mom and dad. I called them when the workboat I signed onto got to a port up the coast about 30 miles. They were okay. The red house was gone, but of course the firemen never found any bodies. All that was left was the red station wagon. I figured they'd hauled that off to where the junked cars are, and the blind old man who lives there would have a new place to sleep. Dad got into some trouble, but he pleaded temporary insanity. Everybody on Accardo knew Bull was half crazy, that he'd been under a lot of pressure and drank a lot. Mr. Lindquist, I heard later, was puzzled by the whole thing, like everybody else, but the clapboard houses were cheap, and he decided to build a white brick house across from my folks. Mr. Lindquist had wanted to get rid of those clapboard things and put up stronger houses for the factory workers anyway. This just started the ball rolling. My folks asked me to come back, of course, promised me everything, said I could go to college whenever I wanted, all that stuff. But their voices sounded weak. I heard the terror in those voices, and I felt so sorry for them because they knew the walls of their cage were painted gray. Oh, I'll go back to Greystone Bay sometime, but not until later. Not until I've found out who I am and what I am. I'm Bob Deacon now. I still can't figure it out. Was it planned? Was it happenstance? Did those creatures that loved fire just fit me into their lives by accident or on purpose? You know, they say the devil craves fire, but whatever the Sykeses were, they unlocked me from a cage. They weren't evil. Like Virgil Sykes said, fire creates as well as it destroys. They're not dead. Oh, no. They're just somewhere else. Maybe I'll meet them again sometime. Anything's possible. You know, I may not be a red house. I may be a blue one, or a green one, or some other color I haven't even seen yet. But I know I'm not a gray house. I know that for sure. Well, another great lesson to be learned in that story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us next week for another Friday Night Frights. Until then, have a great week, everyone.